The wanted poster trembled in Samuel Reed's weathered hands, his own younger face staring back at him through 20 years of dust and regret. $500, dead or alive. He traced the lettering with a calloused thumb, wondering if that price still stood or if the world had finally forgotten Stillwater Reed. Samuel folded the brittle paper and tucked it back into the hidden compartment beneath a loose floorboard on his porch. The setting Wyoming sun painted long shadows across his land. 40 acres of hard-won peace he'd carved out of this valley under a name that wasn't his. The evening wind carried the scent of sage and approaching autumn, stirring dust devils that danced across the barren yard of what locals knew as the Waters Ranch. A distant crack split the air, gunshot unmistakable. Samuel stiffened, his hand instinctively reaching for a hip that hadn't carried iron in 2 decades. The sound echoed again, followed by several more in rapid succession. He squinted toward the western ridge where the stage road cut through the hills. Samuel retrieved the brass spyglass from his saddlebag and trained it on the distant road. The stagecoach bucked wildly, horses in panicked flight as riders flanked it on both sides. Even at this distance, he recognized the formation, 2 men harrying the team, while 3 more rode alongside the coach itself. Clean, efficient, the Corrigan method. "Not your fight," Samuel muttered, lowering the glass. He'd heard rumors in town, the Corrigan gang moving into Wyoming territory after the law pressed too hard in Colorado. 5 men led by Jake Corrigan, a young blood with old ideas about easy money and quick violence. Samuel turned his back on the distant robbery, the muscles in his jaw working as he stepped inside his cabin. The single room was spare but solid, a plank table, iron stove, narrow bed, a life built to suffice rather than satisfy. He knelt by the stone hearth and pried loose a brick, revealing a small iron box. The key hung around his neck alongside a locket he never opened. Inside lay the remnants of Stillwater Reed, a custom gun belt tooled with running water patterns, twin pearl-handled Remingtons, and yellowed newspaper clippings chronicling the exploits of a man he'd tried to bury. 20 years of quiet don't wash away 20 years of blood, Samuel said to the empty room. Some men don't deserve peace, no matter how much they crave it. The sound of approaching hoofbeats pulled him from dark contemplation. Samuel hastily locked the box and replaced the brick before stepping onto his porch. Young Billy Morgan, son of a neighboring rancher, reined his lathered horse to a stop. "Mr. Waters?" the boy called out, excitement brightening his sunburned face. "You hear about the stage robbery?" Samuel nodded. "Heard the shots? Pa sent me to check on you, seeing as you're out here alone." The boy shifted in his saddle. "Sheriff sent word to Cheyenne for a federal marshal. Says this makes 3 stages hit in 2 weeks. Marshal, huh?" Something cold settled in Samuel's stomach. "Yes, sir. Heard he's some real hard case from Kansas. Named Blackwood." Samuel's hand tightened on the porch rail. "Blackwood?" "Yes, sir. James Blackwood. They say he's tracked outlaws clean across 3 territories." Billy grinned, revealing a missing tooth. "Bet even the Corrigan gang won't stand against a federal man." Samuel turned away to hide the sudden drain of color from his face. "Your pa expecting you back?" "Yes, sir. Just wanted to make sure you were all right." "I'm fine. Tell your pa thanks for the concern." As Billy galloped away, Samuel sank onto the porch step, his heart hammering against his ribs. James Blackwood, his son. The boy had been just 12 when Samuel walked away, leaving him and his mother in Kansas with a new name and enough money to start fresh, away from the shadow of Stillwater Reed. Now that boy was a man, a lawman, coming to the place where his father had hidden for 20 years. Samuel wasn't sure if this was justice or cruel coincidence, but either way, his hard-won peace had just ridden out on the evening wind. Redemption Creek barely deserved the name town, a single dusty street lined with false-fronted buildings serving the scattered ranches of the region. Samuel tethered his horse outside the general store, adjusting his hat low over his eyes, from habit rather than necessity. Nobody here knew him as anything but the reclusive rancher Samuel Waters. Nobody except, perhaps, the man dismounting before the sheriff's office across the street. Marshal James Blackwood moved with the rigid confidence of someone who'd survived his share of trouble. Tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair cut short beneath a gray hat, a silver badge catching morning light on his chest. Samuel felt a shock of recognition, the set of the jaw, the way he stood with weight slightly forward on the balls of his feet, ready to move in any direction. Mary's eyes in a face that otherwise might have been looking back from a mirror 20 years ago. Samuel ducked into the general store, nodding to Whitaker behind the counter while keeping the lawman in his peripheral vision through the window. "Morning, Waters," Whitaker said. "Usual supplies? And some extra coffee, if you've got it." Samuel positioned himself to watch the marshal conferring with Sheriff Holloway on the boardwalk opposite. "Hear about the stage?" Whitaker asked, gathering items. "Third one this month. Corrigan's getting bold." "Bold gets men killed," Samuel replied absently, studying his son's profile. Whitaker glanced toward the lawmen. "That there's the federal marshal from Cheyenne, Blackwood, supposed to be quite the manhunter." "So I heard. Sheriff's gathering a posse tomorrow. Might be looking for men who know the territory." Samuel paid for his supplies and stepped out onto the boardwalk just as the marshal and sheriff crossed the street. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. The boy had grown into his father's frame, but carried himself with a discipline Samuel had never possessed. "Mr. Waters," Sheriff Holloway called. "Got a minute?" Samuel nodded, setting his parcels down. "This is Marshal James Blackwood, Federal Service. Marshal, this is Samuel Waters, runs a small spread east of town." The marshal's eyes, Mary's eyes, studied him with professional assessment. "Mr. Waters." "Marshal." Samuel kept his voice neutral, fighting the urge to search that face for the boy he'd left behind. "Mr. Waters knows this territory better than most," Holloway continued. "Been here near 20 years. That right?" Blackwood's gaze sharpened. "You ever have trouble with road agents out your way?" "Can't say I have." "You seen any strange riders lately? Group of 5, led by a man with a red bandana?" Samuel hesitated. "Might have spotted some dust from the ridge line yesterday. Headed toward the old silver diggings, looked like." "Mind showing us on a map?" the sheriff asked. Inside the sheriff's office, Samuel indicated the likely routes while stealing glances at his son's face. A small scar above his right eyebrow that hadn't been there before. Lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into too many suns. "Corrigan's hitting every stage with mining payroll," Blackwood said. "Next one's due through on Thursday." "You're planning an ambush for the ambushers," Samuel said, recognizing the strategy. Blackwood studied him with renewed interest. "That's the idea. You'll need men who know the back trails." "Corrigan leaves scouts out." "You volunteering, Waters?" the sheriff asked. Before Samuel could answer, the door burst open. A young deputy stood breathless in the doorway. "Sheriff, just got word from the Taylor place. Mrs. Taylor spotted riders watching her property last night." Holloway swore under his breath. "The widow and her kids?" The deputy nodded. "She's scared, Sheriff. Place is mighty isolated." The school teacher? Blackwood asked. Emma Taylor, Holloway confirmed. Husband was killed in a mining accident last year. She's got 2 young ones out there. Teaches school in town 3 days a week. Samuel frowned. Her place is just below the cut trail to the old mine works. If Corrigan's using those mines as a hideout, Blackwood let the implication hang. I'm riding out there, the sheriff decided. Marshal, you want to come along? Blackwood shook his head. I need to check the stage route. I'll catch up with you after. I can take supplies out to the Taylor place, Samuel offered, surprising himself. Was heading that direction anyway. Something flickered in Blackwood's expression, suspicion, perhaps. Something familiar about you, Mr. Waters. You ever spend time in Kansas? Samuel held his son's gaze. Can't say that I have. I'm not much for traveling these days. Huh. Blackwood studied him a moment longer. Well, I appreciate the assistance with Mrs. Taylor. I'll stop by there this evening. As Samuel gathered his supplies, the sheriff pulled him aside. Waters, I didn't want to say this in front of the marshal, but that Taylor place might need more than supplies, if Corrigan's watching it. I'll keep an eye out, Samuel promised, the weight of a life he'd abandoned settling back across his shoulders like an old, familiar coat. Samuel spotted the Taylor homestead from the ridge, a small cabin with a barn and corral nestled in a protected hollow near a spring-fed creek. A good piece of land, if hard to defend. As he approached, the afternoon sun slanting through cottonwoods, he noted the newly split stack of firewood and the vegetable garden, signs of a woman determined to make her own way. Emma Taylor stood in the doorway before he dismounted, a shotgun held casually but competently at her side. 2 children peered from behind her skirts, a boy about 10 and a girl a few years younger. Mr. Waters, isn't it? Her voice carried clearly across the yard. Samuel touched his hat brim. Ma'am, Sheriff asked me to bring some supplies. She lowered the shotgun and stepped forward, tall and straight-backed, her brown hair pulled into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. Not a beautiful woman by conventional standards, but striking in her directness. That's kind of you. She nodded toward the ridge he'd descended. You see anyone following? No, ma'am, but I wasn't looking hard. He dismounted, untying the supply sacks. Sheriff mentioned you spotted riders? 2 nights running. Emma ushered her children forward. Thomas, Sarah, help Mr. Waters with those bags. Mind your manners. The boy stepped forward first, studying Samuel with solemn eyes. You're the man who doesn't come to town much. Samuel handed him the lightest sack. That's right. Pa said you keep to yourself because you're hiding something. The boy's candor earned him a sharp look from his mother. Thomas Taylor. I apologize, Mr. Waters. My late husband had notions about everyone. Samuel's mouth quirked. Your husband wasn't entirely wrong, ma'am. Every man's hiding something. Inside, the cabin was neat but worn. A plank table, a few chairs, bed separated by hanging quilts. A slate board and chalk suggested where Emma conducted lessons for children from surrounding homesteads. We were about to have supper, Emma said. You're welcome to stay. Samuel started to decline, then reconsidered. Thank you. Might be wise to check your roof and shutters before dark. Over a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and dried apple pie, Samuel watched Emma with her children, patient as she corrected their manners, firm as she assigned chores, gentle as she wiped a smudge from the girl's cheek. A complete family that had no need for the complications his presence would bring. Afterward, Samuel inspected the roof while Emma washed dishes. He spotted the loose shingles easily enough, but his attention kept straying to the surrounding ridges. The fading light played tricks on the eye, but years of watching his back had given him an instinct for surveillance. Someone's up there, he said when Emma brought him a cup of coffee on the porch. Ridge to the west. Emma stiffened, but didn't look directly toward the spot. Corrigan's men? Most likely. Samuel sipped his coffee. Best get the children to bed early. Keep the lamps low. Marshal Blackwood is supposed to come by this evening. He might be delayed. Don't count on him. Emma studied Samuel's face. You sound like a man who's dealt with trouble before. Samuel set his cup down. I should check your barn before dark. The barn was sturdy, but offered too many hiding places. Samuel methodically cleared the loft and stalls, noting sight lines and potential cover. He was examining the rear door when a floorboard creaked behind him. He spun, reaching for a gun that wasn't there, and found Emma watching him with narrowed eyes. You move like my uncle did, she said quietly. He rode with Union guerrillas during the war. Never quite shed the caution. Samuel relaxed marginally. Old habits. What were your old habits, Miss Ditt? Waters? Before he could answer, a child's frightened cry came from the house. They both ran for the door. Thomas stood in the cabin doorway, pointing toward the corral. Men coming. 3 riders approached from the creekside, silhouettes against the last glow of sunset. No attempt at stealth. They wanted to be seen, to instill fear. Get inside, Samuel ordered. Bar the door. My shotgun. Won't help against 3 of them. Go. Emma gathered her children and retreated into the cabin. Samuel stood alone on the porch as the riders approached, cursing his lack of preparation. 20 years of peace had made him careless. Evening, old-timer, the lead rider called, a man with a week's growth of beard and a red bandana at his throat. This the Taylor place? It is. Samuel kept his stance relaxed, hands visible. Mrs. Taylor expecting company? Just the marshal. Should be along shortly. The 3 men exchanged glances. The leader smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. And well now, that's unfortunate. We just came to pay our respects to the widow lady. Maybe discuss a business arrangement. Samuel stepped down from the porch. I think you boys took a wrong turn. Town's back that way. Ain't looking for town. The man on the right, younger, with a pock-marked face, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. Looking for some hospitality. Won't find it here. Samuel moved to position himself between the riders and the cabin door. Who the hell are you, anyway? Demanded the 3rd man. Nobody important, just passing through. The leader's hand drifted toward his holster. Well, nobody important. You might want to pass through a little quicker before you get hurt. Samuel felt a familiar stillness settle over him, the calm that had always preceded violence in his former life. I don't want trouble. Too late for that. The leader drew his revolver in a practiced motion. Now step aside, or... Samuel moved before the threat was complete, a fluid pivot and lunge that caught the man unprepared. He wrenched the gun from the outlaw's hand, twisting until something snapped in the man's wrist. The leader screamed, tumbling from his saddle. Samuel was already turning, the captured revolver aimed and firing at the pockmarked youth. The shot caught him high in the chest, throwing him backward off his horse. The 3rd rider got a shot off that tore through Samuel's sleeve before Samuel fired twice in rapid succession. The first bullet struck the man's shoulder, spinning him sideways. The second caught him cleanly through the throat. In the sudden silence, Samuel stood with guns still raised, 3 men down in less than 10 seconds. The leader writhed on the ground, clutching his broken wrist. You broke my damn hand, he gasped. Samuel aimed the revolver at his face. That the only complaint you want to make? Behind him, the cabin door opened. Emma stood framed in the lamplight, her shotgun ready, her eyes wide at the scene before her. "Keep the children inside," Samuel said without turning. The outlaw stared up at Samuel, recognition dawning. "Wait, the way you move. Are you?" Samuel fired a final shot that ended the question permanently. Emma's shotgun wavered. "Who are you really, Mr. Waters?" Samuel lowered the revolver, the familiar weight bringing back memories he'd spent 20 years suppressing. Someone who should have kept riding 20 years ago. The sound of an approaching horse drew their attention. Marshal Blackwood appeared on the trail, rifle at the ready. He reined in sharply at the sight of the three bodies, and Samuel standing over them with a smoking gun. The look that passed between father and son, one recognizing the other's nature, if not his identity, told Samuel that 20 years of running had just come to an end. Blood always shows, no matter how deep you bury it. 3 clean kills. No wasted shots. Marshal Blackwood circled the bodies of Corrigan's men as dawn broke over the Taylor homestead. His eyes kept returning to Samuel, measuring, not the shooting of a rancher. Samuel leaned against the porch post, arms crossed. Man lives long enough, he picks up skills. Skills like breaking a wrist one-handed and putting 2 bullets in a man's chest while he's falling. Blackwood's tone remained even, but his stance had shifted, weight forward, hand near his sidearm. The children watched from the window, Emma standing protectively behind them. Samuel felt the weight of their eyes as heavily as his son's suspicion. "Would have been better if I'd missed?" Samuel asked. "Would have been more believable." Blackwood knelt to examine the gunshot wounds. "This is professional work." Sheriff Holloway, who'd arrived minutes after Blackwood, cleared his throat. "Whatever Mr. Waters was before, he saved this family. That's what matters now." Blackwood's jaw tightened. "What matters is that Jake Corrigan is going to retaliate. These men were his cousins." Emma stepped onto the porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the morning chill. "Then we need to find him first." Blackwood turned toward her. "Mrs. Taylor, you and your children should come to town until—" "This is my home." Her voice held steel beneath the weariness. "I won't be driven from it." Samuel recognized the stubborn set of her chin. She reminded him of Mary in that moment, the same unflinching courage that had first drawn him, before his reputation had driven them apart. "She's right," Samuel said. "Running just makes them bolder. We need to take the fight to Corrigan." Blackwood studied him, then nodded curtly. "Sheriff's forming a posse. We ride at noon." After the lawman departed, Emma handed Samuel a cup of coffee, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Who taught you to shoot like that?" Samuel stared into the dark liquid. "Comes natural to some." "And the rest?" He met her eyes. "Rest is best forgotten. The marshal suspects something. Man would be a poor lawman if he didn't." Samuel sipped his coffee, wincing at the memory of his son's calculating stare. Mary's eyes turned cold and assessing. "I'll be gone before they return." Emma's hand touched his sleeve. "And leave me unprotected?" "You'll have the posse. I don't trust them like I trust you." The simple declaration hung between them. By noon, a dozen men had gathered outside the sheriff's office. Ranchers, shopkeepers, a few miners. Samuel sat his horse apart from the others, aware of Blackwood watching him from the jailhouse steps. Sheriff Holloway outlined their plan. Follow the canyon trail to the abandoned mining camp where Corrigan was believed to be hiding. Samuel listened with half an ear, noting the men's inexperience. Most had never faced men who killed for a living. "Waters," Blackwood approached as the others prepared to mount up. "You're riding scout. You know the territory." It wasn't a request. Samuel nodded, accepting the Winchester rifle Blackwood handed him. The weight felt familiar in his hands. Too familiar. The posse rode single file along the narrow trail, Samuel a quarter-mile ahead. Behind him, dust rose from the column like smoke signals announcing their approach. He could feel his son's eyes on his back, probing for weakness, for truth. At a fork in the canyon, Samuel dismounted to check the trail. Fresh tracks led toward the old silver mine. Multiple horses, moving at a walk. Corrigan, confident and unhurried. A sound from the brush brought Samuel's rifle up, but it was only Emma Taylor, leading a pack mule loaded with supplies. "Mrs. Taylor," Samuel lowered his weapon. "This isn't safe. I'm joining as cook." She straightened her riding skirt. "Children are with the Morgans. I won't sit waiting while others decide my fate." Before Samuel could argue, Blackwood and the sheriff rounded the bend. The marshal's expression darkened at the sight of Emma, but the sheriff merely sighed. "Told you not to try stopping her," Holloway said. Blackwood dismounted. "Mrs. Taylor, this is no place for—" "For what, Marshal? A woman?" Emma's chin lifted. "I've buried a husband and built a homestead alone. I've faced outlaws and drought. I can manage a camp stove." Something like respect flickered in Blackwood's eyes. He nodded curtly. "Stay with the main group." That night, the posse camped in a sheltered draw. Samuel took the first watch, perched on a rocky outcrop, with the valley spread before him. No fires burned at the mine in the distance. Corrigan was too canny for that. Footsteps crunched on gravel. Samuel didn't turn as Blackwood settled beside him. "You tracking something?" the marshal asked. "Just watching." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Blackwood spoke again, his voice lower. "My father was a gunman." Samuel kept his face impassive. "That's so?" "Stillwater Reed. Heard of him?" "Name sounds familiar. From the war days?" "After." Blackwood picked up a small stone, turning it in his fingers. "Rode with Quantrill for a while, then went his own way. Robbed stages, banks, killed men for money." Samuel watched the stone tumble from Blackwood's fingers into the darkness below. "Bad business. Abandoned me and my mother when I was 12. Just rode out one day." Bitterness edged his voice. "She died waiting for him to return." The ache in Samuel's chest threatened to choke him. Maybe he thought leaving was the kindest thing. "Kindest?" Blackwood laughed without humor. "My father was a killer who cared more for his guns than his family." Samuel stared at the distant hills. Maybe he thought leaving was the only gift he had left to give. Blackwood studied him in the moonlight. "You talk like a man who's left something behind." Samuel met his son's gaze, seeing the boy he'd abandoned beneath the man's hard exterior. "Everyone leaves something, Marshal. Question is whether what they find after is worth the cost." The next morning, they captured a Corrigan rider attempting to scout their position. The man, a weasel-faced drifter with a gap-toothed smile, sat bound by the campfire while Blackwood questioned him. "Corrigan's got 8 men at the mine," the prisoner said, "plus whatever Jake brought back from Laramie." "What's he planning?" Blackwood demanded. The man spat. "Don't tell me nothing. I just ride lookout." His eyes drifted to Samuel, narrowing suddenly. "Say, ain't you—" Samuel kicked dirt onto the fire, sending a plume of smoke into the man's face. "Ain't nobody," he growled. "Just like you'll be if Corrigan finds out you're singing." The distraction worked. By the time the coughing stopped, Blackwood had moved on to other questions. But Samuel felt a prickle between his shoulder blades, a familiar warning. Time was running short. The old silver mine hunched against the mountainside like a wound in the earth. From their vantage point on the ridge, Samuel counted 3 guards, 1 at the mine entrance, 2 patrolling the small collection of weathered buildings that had once housed miners. "Too quiet," he muttered to Blackwood, who lay beside him studying the camp through field glasses. Thinking the same. The marshal lowered the glasses. "Where are the rest?" The answer came with the crack of a rifle from the rocks behind them. A bullet kicked dirt inches from Samuel's head. "Ambush!" Samuel rolled sideways as more shots erupted from the surrounding heights. The posse scattered for cover, horses screaming in panic. Samuel dragged Blackwood behind a boulder as bullets chipped stone around them. "They knew we were coming!" Blackwood shouted above the gunfire. Someone talked. Samuel peered around the rock, counting muzzle flashes. At least 6 shooters on the ridge alone. Or they have a man in town. We need to fall back. Blackwood flinched as a bullet struck uncomfortably close. "Regroup in the canyon." "No!" Samuel checked his rifle. "That's what they want. They'll pick us off in the narrow pass." Blackwood's eyes met his. Calculation and growing respect. "What do you suggest?" "Split their attention." Samuel nodded toward a tumble of rocks to their left. "I'll draw fire while you get the men to that wash. You can flank them from there." "That's suicide." Samuel almost smiled. "Done crazier things." Before Blackwood could object, Samuel darted from cover, firing rapidly at the ridge. Bullets kicked dirt at his heels as he zigzagged between boulders, diving behind a fallen pine as wood splinters exploded around him. The diversion worked. Blackwood led most of the posse toward the wash, returning fire as they moved. Samuel glimpsed Emma crouched behind a wagon wheel, Sheriff Holloway's arm around her shoulders. A bullet grazed Samuel's temple, hot as a branding iron. Blood trickled into his eye as he rolled to a new position. His rifle clicked empty. Drawing his revolver, Samuel counted shots. 2 left. Make them count, he thought, just as a scream cut through the gunfire. Blackwood stood exposed on a rocky shelf, clutching his thigh. Blood darkened his trousers as he staggered, rifle slipping from his grasp. 2 Corrigan men rose from the rocks above him, taking aim. Time slowed. Samuel acted without conscious thought. Breaking cover. Revolver extended. 2 shots. 2 bodies falling. Empty gun. He reached Blackwood as the marshal collapsed, catching him before he hit the ground. "Damn fool," Samuel muttered, dragging him toward shelter. "Takes one to know one." Blackwood's face was gray with pain and blood loss. The firing had slackened. Samuel heard Sheriff Holloway organizing a retreat, calling for the men to fall back to defensible ground. Smart move. Corrigan had the high ground and numbers. Samuel tore a strip from his shirt, binding Blackwood's thigh tightly above the wound. "Bullet's still in there." Blackwood gritted his teeth. "Wouldn't be my first." As Samuel worked, his torn sleeve fell back, revealing a distinctive scar on his forearm, a curved mark like flowing water. Blackwood's eyes fixed on it, recognition dawning. "That scar," he whispered. Samuel yanked his sleeve down. "We need to move." They made it to the main group as the sun westered behind the mountains. The posse had found shelter in a box canyon with a defensible entrance, but the mood was grim. 2 men dead, 3 wounded, including Blackwood. Emma boiled water while the sheriff's deputy, a former Army medic, prepared to remove the bullet from Blackwood's leg. Samuel kept watch at the canyon entrance, his borrowed rifle reloaded with cartridges taken from the dead. Later, as darkness fell, he checked on his son. Blackwood lay on a bedroll, face flushed with fever. The bullet was out, but infection remained a threat. "He needs a doctor," Emma said softly, placing a cool cloth on the marshal's forehead. "Too risky to move him now." Samuel studied his son's face, seeing echoes of the boy he'd been. "Corrigan's men are still out there." Emma's hand touched his arm. "You saved him." "Least I could do." Her eyes searched his face. "There's more between you two than you're saying." Samuel turned away. "Just doing what's right." A commotion at the edge of camp drew their attention. Josiah Pitt, a burly bounty hunter who joined the posse in town, was arguing with the sheriff. The man's voice carried clearly in the night air. "I'm telling you, I know that face, 20 years older, but it's him." Samuel tensed. Pitt had been eyeing him strangely since the firefight. "Keep your voice down," Holloway hissed. "500 in gold, Sheriff," Pitt insisted. "That's what the poster says for Stillwater Reed." Emma's hand tightened on Samuel's arm. Her eyes widened in question, but she said nothing. "You're drunk, Pitt," the sheriff said. "Waters has been in this territory for 20 years. Look at how he shoots. Ask the marshal when he wakes up. That's Reed's son he's riding with." Samuel's hand dropped to his empty holster. Time had finally caught up with him. That night, Samuel took watch again, needing distance to think. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant as judgment. From his position, he could see Pitt watching him from across the camp, waiting for his chance. Near midnight, Blackwood stirred, calling out in his fever. Samuel approached cautiously, kneeling beside him. "Pa," Blackwood murmured, eyes unfocused. "That you?" Samuel swallowed hard. "Rest easy, son. You left us." Blackwood's hand clutched Samuel's sleeve. "Why'd you leave?" Before Samuel could answer, a shadow fell across them. Pitt stood there, revolver aimed at Samuel's head. "Don't move, Reed," he whispered. 500 bounty, dead or alive, and dead's easier to transport." Samuel stared up at the barrel. "You're making a mistake, Pitt." "No mistake. Saw your wanted poster 100 times." Pitt grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Stillwater Reed, the stage-robbing bastard who shot 2 Pinkerton men in '68. That was a lifetime ago. Law doesn't forget. Now get up, nice and slow." Samuel complied, hands raised. "What's your plan? Shoot me here?" "Thinking I'll take you out quiet-like. Tell the others you ran." Movement flickered at the edge of Samuel's vision. Emma stood frozen in the shadows, a pot of broth in her hands, witnessing everything. "You won't make it out of this canyon," Samuel warned. "Not with Corrigan's men watching." "Worth the risk for 500. Pitt jabbed the gun forward. "Now walk." In the moment Pitt gestured, Samuel moved, a lightning strike that sent the gun spinning into darkness. His hand closed around the bounty hunter's throat, driving him backward against the canyon wall. "You're Stillwater Reed," Pitt choked out, eyes bulging. 500 in gold still on your head." Samuel tightened his grip. "And you'll never spend a cent of it." One sharp blow, and Pitt slumped unconscious. Samuel bound and gagged him, then turned to find Emma watching, her face unreadable in the moonlight. "It's true, then," she said quietly. Samuel couldn't deny it any longer. "Yes, and the marshal is your son, James. Mary named him that." Samuel gathered his few possessions. "I need to go. When Pitt wakes—" "Go where?" Emma set down the broth pot. "Corrigan's men surround us. I'll find a way through." "And then what? Keep running?" Her voice hardened. "For how long, Mr. Reed?" The sound of his real name struck him like a physical blow. "Until they stop looking, or I stop breathing." Emma stepped closer. "There's another choice." Not for men like me. The man I've seen these past days protected my children, saved the marshal. That's not the man on wanted posters. Samuel looked toward his sleeping son. James won't see it that way when he wakes. He's hunted outlaws his whole life because of me. Then face him. Face what you did. Make it right. Samuel shouldered his saddlebags. Too late for that. It's never too late to stop running. But Samuel was already moving through the shadows toward the canyon's edge. Behind him, Emma watched with disappointed eyes as 20 years of hiding became 20 years and one more day. At his homestead, Samuel retrieved the iron box from its hiding place. The twin Remingtons felt like old friends in his hands, the custom gun belt settling around his hips as if he'd never removed it. He was packing provisions when the door opened. Emma stood framed in moonlight, alone and unarmed. "The children," Samuel said, "still with the Morgans." She stepped inside, closing the door. "I followed you. Wasn't hard. You shouldn't be here. Neither should you." Emma's voice was calm, but her eyes blazed. "Jake Corrigan took my children an hour ago. Left a message with the Morgans that he'll trade them for the man who killed his cousins." The floor seemed to shift beneath Samuel's feet. "What?" "2 men. Professional. The Morgans couldn't stop them." Her composure cracked slightly. "They're just babies, Mr. Reed. Thomas is only 10. Sarah's 7. Samuel buckled on his gun belt. "Where?" "The mine. Dawn tomorrow." Emma's hands twisted together. "The marshal's still unconscious. The sheriff won't risk the posse against Corrigan's men, not after today." "Good. This isn't their fight. It's not yours either." "Not really." Samuel checked his revolvers, the motion automatic after all these years. "It is now." Emma studied him in the lamplight. "You're going alone against Jake Corrigan's entire gang." "I've faced worse odds. As Stillwater Reed. But who are you now?" Her question hung between them, demanding truth after 20 years of lies. Samuel looked at her. This woman who'd survived a husband's death, who'd built a life through sheer determination, who now faced her children's kidnapping without breaking. "I'm a man with a debt to pay," he said finally. "To my son, to you, maybe to myself." Emma nodded slowly. "I'm coming with you." "No. They're my children, and I'll bring them back." Samuel took her hands in his. "I promise you that, Emma Taylor. Your children will come home." In her eyes, he saw something he hadn't seen directed at him in 20 years. Trust. "Don't make promises you can't keep," she whispered. Samuel's smile held no humor. "Only promise I ever kept was the one I made to myself, that Stillwater Reed would never hurt another innocent. He would die keeping that promise if necessary." Dawn painted the eastern sky blood red as Samuel crested the ridge overlooking the mine. He'd approached from the north, using game trails too narrow for most men to follow. 20 years of peace hadn't dulled the predatory instincts that had once made Stillwater Reed both feared and famous. 6 men guarded the mine entrance. 2 more patrolled the weathered structures of the abandoned camp. All heavily armed, all watching the main trail where they expected a posse that wouldn't come. They weren't looking for one man approaching from behind. Samuel checked his revolvers one final time. The pearl handles caught the early light, a silent reminder of the man he'd once been. 20 years ago, he'd have killed these men without hesitation. For money, for reputation, for the simple satisfaction of being the fastest. Today, he would kill only for the children. He made his way down the rocky slope, moving from shadow to shadow with the patience of a mountain lion. The years fell away with each step, muscle memory returning like an old, familiar sin. At the edge of camp, Samuel paused behind a rusted ore cart. Inside the largest structure, once the assayer's office, he glimpsed movement through a grimy window. A small figure darted past, the tailor girl. Relief loosened the knot in his chest. The children were alive. A guard rounded the corner, rifle cradled across his arms. Samuel struck with silent efficiency, one blow to the throat, another to the temple. He lowered the unconscious man without a sound, taking his rifle and ammunition. 1 down, 7 to go. "Morgan, you see something?" Another guard approached, hand on his holstered revolver. Samuel stepped from the shadows, Remington leveled. "Looking for someone?" The man's hand froze above his gun. Recognition widened his eyes. Take your gun out. 2 fingers. Drop it." The guard complied, face pale. "You're supposed to be dead." "Not yet." Samuel gestured toward the assayer's office. "The children in there?" A nod. "Corrigan?" "Inside with them." "How many more men besides the ones I can see?" "Just us 8. The guard swallowed hard. "Please, I got a family." "So do those children." Samuel's voice hardened. "On your knees, hands behind your head." Once the man was secured, Samuel approached the assayer's office, keeping to blind spots. Through a side window, he saw Emma's children huddled in a corner. The boy's face was bruised, his arm around his sister protectively. Jake Corrigan paced before them, a man in his 30s with a red bandana and cold, calculating eyes. "Your mother's taking her sweet time," Corrigan said to the children. "Maybe she doesn't want you back." "She's coming," Thomas Taylor replied, his young voice steady despite his fear. "And she's bringing the marshal." Corrigan laughed. "The marshal's half dead from a bullet my men put in him." Samuel moved to the back door, testing it silently. Locked. He continued around the building, counting guards, noting positions. 7 men remaining, most watching the main trail. Corrigan alone with the children. The door to the assayer's office opened. Corrigan emerged, barking orders to his men to maintain their watch. Samuel pressed against the wall, hidden from view as Corrigan passed within arm's reach. "Anything?" Corrigan asked a guard. "Nothing yet, boss." "Keep watching. They'll come for the brats." As Corrigan turned back toward the door, Samuel stepped into view, both Remingtons drawn. "They already have." Corrigan froze, his hand halfway to his gun. His eyes narrowed in momentary confusion, then widened in recognition. "Stillwater Reed." Corrigan's voice held something like awe. "The stories said you were dead." They were almost right. Samuel kept both guns trained on Corrigan's chest. "Tell your men to drop their weapons." Corrigan smiled, not moving toward his holster. "Why would I do that? There's 1 of you and 7 of us. 6 now. Doesn't matter. You're outnumbered." "Wouldn't be the first time." Samuel stepped closer. "The children, now." Corrigan studied him with newfound interest. "You're Stillwater Reed. We could own this territory together. I grew up hearing stories about you, how you robbed the Denver stage single-handed, how you outshot the Wallace brothers in Laramie." "Ancient history." "Doesn't have to be." Corrigan's eyes gleamed with opportunity. "I've built something here. With your reputation, your skill, we could take everything from Cheyenne to Salt Lake." For a heartbeat, Samuel saw the path not taken, the continuation of his old life, the power that came with fear, the twisted respect of men like Corrigan. It would be easier than redemption, simpler than facing his son. No, Samuel's voice was quiet but final. Release the children. Disappointment darkened Corrigan's face. The great Stillwater Reed, reduced to rescuing brats. What happened to you, old man? I stopped running from what I was, started becoming what I should have been. Poetic, also pathetic. Corrigan's hand twitched toward his holster. Last chance to ride with me. Stillwater died 20 years ago, Samuel said. I'm just the man who carried his sins. Corrigan drew. He was fast, faster than Samuel expected. But 20 years hadn't slowed Samuel's reflexes. Both men fired simultaneously. Corrigan's bullet grazed Samuel's shoulder. Samuel's shot took Corrigan high in the chest, spinning him halfway around before he collapsed in the dirt. Gunfire erupted from all sides. Samuel dove for cover behind a water trough as bullets splintered wood around him. He returned fire methodically. One shot, one man down. The Remington spoke with deadly precision as Samuel moved from cover to cover. A bullet caught him in the side, a line of fire that stole his breath but didn't slow his advance. Another creased his thigh. Samuel ignored the pain, focused only on reaching the children. 4 men down, then 5. The 6th broke cover, running for the mine entrance. Samuel's bullet caught him between the shoulder blades. Silence fell across the camp, broken only by the soft moaning of a wounded outlaw. Samuel limped toward the assayer's office, blood soaking his shirt and trousers. Each step was an act of will. Inside, the children cowered beneath a desk. Thomas's eyes widened at Samuel's bloody appearance. "Mr. Waters? It's all right now." Samuel holstered one revolver, extending his hand. "Your mother sent me. Time to go home." The girl emerged first, rushing to wrap her arms around his waist, despite the blood. Samuel winced, but placed a protective hand on her head. "Are they all dead?" Thomas asked, joining his sister. "The ones that needed killing." Samuel guided them toward the door. "Stay close." Outside, the morning sun had fully cleared the mountains. Samuel scanned the camp. Bodies lay where they had fallen. No movement except for one guard still trying to crawl toward a dropped rifle. Samuel's bullet ended that threat with merciful quickness. "Keep your eyes down," he told the children, turning them away from the carnage. They'd reached the edge of camp when a rifle shot cracked across the clearing. Pain exploded in Samuel's chest, driving him to one knee. Jake Corrigan stood in the doorway of the assayer's office, blood soaking his shirt, rifle wavering in his hands. "Stillwater Reed dies here," Corrigan wheezed, working the lever for another shot. Samuel pushed the children behind him, raising his remaining Remington despite the fire in his chest. His vision blurred, aim uncertain. Before either man could fire, another shot thundered from the trail. Corrigan jerked backward, the rifle falling from lifeless hands. Marshal James Blackwood stood at the camp's entrance, rifle still raised, his wounded leg braced against a boulder. Behind him, Emma Taylor rushed forward, Sheriff Holloway supporting her arm. "Thomas! Sarah!" Emma gathered her children into her arms, tears streaming down her face. Samuel tried to stand, but his strength was fading. Blood pooled beneath him as he sank back to his knees. Through darkening vision, he saw Blackwood limping toward him, rifle lowered but ready. "Stillwater Reed," Samuel acknowledged, too weak for further denial. "Your father." Blackwood knelt before him, eyes, Mary's eyes, searching his face. "I know." "How long?" "Since I saw your scar, maybe before." Blackwood's voice held no warmth, but no hatred either. "You saved my life yesterday. Small payment, For what I took. Emma appeared beside them, her children secure with the sheriff. He saved Thomas and Sarah, Marshall, alone against Corrigan's entire gang. Samuel's revolver slipped from bloodless fingers. "The locket," he whispered to Blackwood, "inside my shirt." Blackwood hesitated, then reached for the chain around Samuel's neck. The golden locket gleamed in the morning light, the last gift he'd given Mary before leaving. "Your mother's," Samuel managed. "Should have stayed with her." "She kept it," Blackwood said quietly, "until the end." Darkness edged Samuel's vision. He'd carried death with him for so long, first dealing it, then defying it. Now it had finally caught up, here in a place aptly named Redemption Creek. "I'm sorry, James," he whispered, "for leaving." Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. Emma pressed her handkerchief to the wound in his chest, but her eyes held the knowledge they both shared. Too late. "Why did you go?" Blackwood asked, the question of 20 years finally spoken aloud. Samuel looked from his son to Emma, then to her children, who watched from a distance. "Thought I was poison to you. That distance was the only gift I had left." "You were wrong." "Wouldn't be, the first time." Blackwood's hand closed around Samuel's, a gesture of forgiveness or merely comfort for a dying man. Samuel couldn't tell. Either way, it was more than he deserved. "Pa," Blackwood said, the word strange on his tongue after so many years. Samuel smiled faintly. "Been a long time since you called me that. Been a long time since you earned it." The pain was fading now, replaced by a spreading coldness. Samuel looked past his son to the rising sun that painted the mountains gold. For the first time in 20 years, he felt the weight of Stillwater Reed lift from his shoulders. "Take care of them," he whispered, his gaze moving to Emma and her children. Blackwood followed his glance. Understanding passed between father and son. One final wordless connection before the darkness claimed Samuel Reed. His last thought was that death, when it finally came, felt strangely like peace. James Blackwood stood on the porch of the Waters Ranch, watching the sun sink behind the western mountains. 6 weeks had passed since the gunfight at the abandoned mine. 6 weeks since he'd buried the man he'd spent half his life hating and the other half hunting. The wanted poster lay in his hands, yellowed and creased from years in his father's possession. Across the face, stamped in red ink, "Deceased." The door opened behind him. Emma Taylor stepped out, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. "Supper's nearly ready," she said. "Children are washing up." James nodded, still studying the poster. "Found this among his things." "He kept it all these years." Emma moved beside him, her shoulder nearly touching his as she looked at the faded image of Stillwater Reed in his younger days. To remind himself of who he was, or who he didn't want to be anymore. Both, maybe. They stood in companionable silence. The Taylor children's laughter drifted from inside the cabin, a sound that had been absent from the Waters Ranch for 20 years. "Will you go back to Cheyenne?" Emma asked finally. James tucked the poster into his coat pocket. "Eventually, the territorial marshal expects a report." "And what will you tell him?" "That Stillwater Reed died decades ago. That a rancher named Samuel Waters gave his life protecting innocent children from Jake Corrigan's gang." Emma studied his profile. "Not the whole truth." "A better truth." James touched the locket that now hung around his neck. "My mother would have preferred it." In the weeks since the gunfight, James had found himself lingering at his father's ranch. And the wound in his leg provided convenient excuse, but the truth was more complex. He'd come to Redemption Creek hunting outlaws and found both less and more than he'd expected. "The children have taken to you," Emma observed. James smiled slightly. "Thomas follows me everywhere, asks about being a lawman. He needs a man to look up to." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but undeniable. James had seen how Emma managed the ranch during his convalescence. Her quiet competence, her stubborn resilience. She reminded him of his mother in ways that stirred forgotten memories. "I've been thinking," James said carefully, "that someone needs to look after this place. It's good land. Your father built it from nothing. Built it for a family he left behind." James turned to face her. "Maybe it's time this place heard children's laughter again." Color touched Emma's cheeks. "Marshal Blackwood, if that's a proposal, it's a poor excuse for one." James laughed, a sound that surprised him with its ease. "Not a proposal, Mrs. Taylor. Not yet. Just a thought about the future." Before she could answer, Thomas burst onto the porch, his sister at his heels. "Ma, Marshal, come see what I've found in the barn." Emma smiled apologetically. "Duty calls." "Go ahead," James said. "I'll be along." After they'd gone, James remained on the porch. The sunset painted the valley in shades of amber and gold, turning the distant creek into a ribbon of fire. His father had chosen this place well, a sanctuary built by a man who'd never believed he deserved peace. James drew the wanted poster from his pocket one last time. The face that had haunted him since childhood stared back, a stranger now reconciled with the dying man who'd called him son. He struck a match and touched it to the corner of the poster. Flame consumed the paper, curling the edges black, erasing the face of Stillwater Reed forever. James dropped the burning remnant into the dirt, watching it disintegrate into ash. What remained of his father lay buried on the hillside overlooking the ranch, Samuel Waters, not Stillwater Reed. The distinction mattered. Inside, Emma called his name. Thomas and Sarah's excited voices joined hers, 3 people who had become unexpectedly important to him, 3 people his father had died protecting. James turned toward the door, leaving the past in ashes behind him. The Waters Ranch would sustain a family again, perhaps the family Samuel Reed had sacrificed everything to give his son, a legacy of protection rather than violence, of redemption rather than regret. The door closed behind him as the last light faded from the valley. Outside, the creek continued its timeless journey, waters still running clear and deep beneath the gathering stars.